The ritual did not begin on the Alpha's ledge. It began in the suffocating silence of my quarters, a small, windowless stone cell at the very edge of the servants' wing. The walls here were perpetually damp, weeping with the condensation of 1,000 forgotten sighs. I had spent the entire afternoon in a state of feverish anticipation, my heart performing a frantic dance against my ribs. In my hands, I held a bundle of dried lavender, its scent faint and dusty, a ghost of the vibrant purple fields that used to bloom near the old barn, where Marcus and I spent our childhood. I remembered how he would pull the petals apart, laughing as the scent clung to his skin. "This is the smell of home, Elara," he would say. "As long as I can smell this, I'll always find my way back to you." With trembling fingers, I began to weave the lavender into my hair. It was a painstaking process, a ritual of hope. I was 18 today, the threshold of destiny. In our world, the 18th year is when the soul finally speaks, when the fated bond, dormant since birth, ignites like a wildfire. I had spent years being the scentless girl, the one the other wolves looked at with a mixture of suspicion and pity. My father had been a high warrior, but my mother was a mystery, a woman from a distant line whose blood was said to be thin. Since their deaths, I had been nothing more than a ghost in the palace halls, scrubbing floors that I was supposed to walk on as royalty. But tonight, I believed everything would change. I believed the moon goddess would finally reveal that my wolf was not absent, but merely waiting for the king to wake her. I looked at my reflection in a cracked piece of glass I had propped up on a wooden crate. The girl staring back was a stranger to me. My eyes were too wide, too haunted, a stormy gray that seemed to reflect the overcast sky of the northern realms. My skin was pale, nearly translucent, and my white dress was a rag I had stitched together with stolen thread. Yet, as I stared, I felt a hum in my marrow, a low, rhythmic vibration that felt like a distant drumbeat. I was certain it was Marcus. I was certain that the bond was already reaching out, tethering our souls across the stone walls of the castle. "Just a few more hours," I whispered to the cold room. "When the moon reaches its zenith, the Alpha King will claim his mate, and they will never look down on me again." As I stepped out of my room, the weight of the pack's hierarchy hit me like a physical blow. To reach the summit, I had to walk through the entire village. The Blackwood pack was not just a group of wolves. It was a rigid machine of power and bloodline. I walked through the lower circle first, the sector of the Omegas and the wounded. These were the people I had shared my meager rations with, yet tonight, they turned their backs. I saw Silas's mother, an old woman who had once taught me how to sew, pull her cloak tight as I passed. The whispers followed me like a swarm of stinging insects. "The ghost is walking to her end," I heard someone hiss. "Marcus would never bind himself to a void. She is a curse on the throne." Every step was a battle against the urge to turn and hide. I passed the infirmary, where Thorn, the head healer, was standing by a grinding stone. The sound of obsidian scraping against metal, scritch, scratch, scritch, filled the air, rhythmic and merciless. Thorn had been the closest thing I had to a father after mine died, but today, he didn't even look up. He was sharpening the ceremonial blades used to mark the rogues. The sound felt like it was carving into my skin, a premonition of the violence to come. I wanted to stop and ask him if he still believed in me, but the look on his face, a mask of grim duty, silenced me. Halfway up the mountain trail, where the pines grow so thick they blot out the stars, the air turned aggressive. Sophia was waiting for me. She was the pride of the Blackwood warriors, a woman whose wolf was a titan of black fur and fire. She stood in the center of the path, her leather armor creaking as she shifted her weight. Her scent, a suffocating mix of spiced amber, smoke, and dominance, filled the narrow pass, making it hard to draw breath. "Going to the ledge, little ghost?" she said, her voice a low, lethal purr. She reached out and grabbed a handful of my hair, her claws grazing my scalp. I winced, but I didn't pull away. She leaned in, her breath hot against my ear. "I can smell the desperation on you, Elara. It smells like rot. Do you really think a sprig of dead lavender will make Marcus forget that you are a defect? A king needs a queen who can stand beside him in a bloodbath. He needs a woman who can howl the mountains down, not a pale, scentless thing that trembles in the wind." She snatched the lavender from my braid and crushed it between her palms, the scent turning bitter as she let the petals fall into the mud. "The moon is for the strong. The dark is for you." I pushed past her, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would shatter my ribs. Her laughter followed me, echoing off the stone walls of the canyon, a jagged sound that tore at my remaining confidence. By the time I reached the summit, the wind had become a predator. It was a cold, biting gale from the north, carrying the scent of ice and ancient, judgmental spirits. The ledge was a massive platform of obsidian, polished smooth by the feet of alphas over 1,000 years. The Council of 12 was already there. They sat in a semicircle of stone thrones, their faces frozen in expressions of ancestral severity. These were the keepers of the law, the men who decided whose blood was pure and whose was a stain. High Elder Valerius stood in the center, his long white hair whipping around his face like a shroud. He held a staff of bone, and as I approached, he struck the ground. The sound was like a thunderclap, silencing the murmurs of the gathered pack. "The lineage of the Blackwood is at a crossroads," he shouted. "We are surrounded by the shadow packs. Our strength is waning. We cannot afford a weak link in the royal chain. The moon goddess demands a queen of fire and power. Let the ritual begin." Then I saw him, Marcus. He was standing at the very edge of the precipice, looking out over the vast, dark kingdom he now ruled. He looked like a god of the old world, draped in the heavy, black-furred pelts of the alphas who came before him. His presence was so immense it seemed to pull the oxygen from the air. For a second, I allowed myself to hope. I remembered the way he used to look at me in the barn, with eyes that saw more than just a servant. I remembered the way his hand felt against mine when he promised we would change the world together. "Marcus," I whispered. My voice was thin, almost lost in the roar of the wind, but I knew his ears could hear it. He didn't turn. The silence stretched, until it was an agonizing torture. I saw Silas standing behind the council, his eyes fixed on me. He was trembling, his hands balled into fists at his sides. He wanted to say something. I could see the words dying in his throat, but the presence of the elders and his brother kept him silent. He looked at me with such profound grief that I felt my stomach turn. He knew. He had seen the council meeting. He knew the decision had been made long before I put the lavender in my hair. When Marcus finally faced me, the golden eyes I had loved my entire life were dead. There was no fire, no recognition, not even the heat of anger. There was only a cold, clinical detachment, as if he were looking at a stray animal that had wandered into his hall. "The law of the pack is written in blood, Elara," he began, his voice amplified by the cliffs, reaching every ear in the valley below. "We are a people of the hunt. We survive because we are the apex. We lead because our blood is pure fire. But fire cannot be birthed from ash. A king cannot lead with a shadow by his side. A pack cannot thrive under a queen who has no howl." "Marcus, please," I said, stepping forward onto the sacred circle. "The bond, it's here. It's humming in my veins. I can feel you, even now. I can feel the weight of your crown, the heat of your wolf. Don't let them tell you what your heart already knows. We were fated. We were promised." He stepped closer, his aura so heavy it forced me to catch my breath. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. I could see the tiny gold flecks in his iris, the same flecks I had stared at 1,000 times. But the man behind them was gone. "What I feel," he hissed, his voice a lethal whisper intended only for me, "is a void. I feel a liability that will cost me my throne if I am foolish enough to claim it. I feel the embarrassment of a boy who once thought a servant could be a queen." He looked up at the moon, which was now at its peak, and raised his hand. The pack fell into a deathly silence. "I, Marcus of the Blackwood Pack, Alpha King of the Northern Realms, hereby invoke the ancient rite of severance. I reject you, Elara, as my mate and my queen. I snap the bond before it can poison my bloodline. You are not my destiny. You are a ghost I am finally exorcising. You are packless. You are rogue. You are dead." The physical sensation of the rejection was a violence beyond anything I had ever known. It felt as though a hot iron had been plunged into my chest, twisted, and then ripped out, taking my soul with it. The golden thread, the only thing that had kept me alive during the years of servitude, wasn't just snapped, it was incinerated. I fell to my knees, the obsidian stones tearing through my dress and into my skin. I didn't scream. I couldn't. There was no air in my lungs, only the cold, empty space where my heart used to be. I looked up at him, my vision fracturing into 1,000 jagged pieces. "Marcus, the North Star. You said, 'The North Star is a cold, dead light, Elara,'" he snarled, his lip curling in a sneer of pure disgust. "And I am a man who needs a sun. Look at you, bleeding in the dirt. You are an embarrassment to the goddess who made us. Go, run to the human lands. Perhaps they have a place for a wolf who was born without a heart. But hear me, if you are within my borders by sunrise, I will treat you like the rogue you now are. I will hunt you myself, and I will not be quick. I will make sure you feel every ounce of the shame you brought to my name." He turned his back. It was the finality of it that broke me. He didn't look back as the heavy iron doors of the great hall were thrown open. The pack began to follow him, a slow, rhythmic march of fur and muscle, but it wasn't a quiet exit. It was a walk of shame. As the warriors passed me, they didn't just ignore me. They spat on the ground at my feet. The Omegas I had helped, the healers I had served, all of them looked away as if I were a plague. Sophia walked by last, leaning down to whisper into my ear, her breath smelling of spiced amber and malice. "The cold is your only mate now, little ghost. Try not to die too loudly. It disturbs the king's sleep." The iron doors slammed shut, with a sound that echoed across the valley like a funeral bell. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, my fingers digging into the frozen obsidian until my nails cracked and bled. I watched the lights of the palace flicker, hearing the distant, muffled sounds of a banquet beginning, a celebration of Marcus's freedom from the scentless girl. Every burst of laughter that drifted down the mountain was a new needle in my skin, a reminder that my entire life had been a lie. I stood up, my legs shaking so violently I nearly fell back into the abyss. I reached into my hair and tore out the remaining lavender sprigs, the ones Sophia hadn't crushed. I held them for a moment, then let them flutter away into the darkness, watching them disappear like the ashes of my childhood. "If I am a ghost," I whispered to the moon, my voice no longer a prayer but a jagged blade of iron, "then I will become the one that haunts your every waking breath. I will be the nightmare that makes your crown feel like a collar of thorns." I didn't head for the southern gates toward the human lands. I turned my back on the civilization that had spat on me and headed for the Forbidden Grove, the place where the shadows are said to have teeth and the trees drink the blood of the forgotten. As I crossed the boundary line, the air changed. It became heavy, smelling of ancient rot, forgotten gods, and a power that the Alphas had tried to bury eons ago. The walk through the grove was a descent into madness. I walked for miles, my bare feet slicing against the frozen undergrowth, each step a battle against the urge to lay down and let the cold take me. My mind began to fracture. I saw visions of Marcus, not the king, but the boy, smiling at me, only for his face to melt into a bleached skull. I heard my mother's voice calling my name from the darkness, a soft melodic sound that promised peace if I just stopped walking. I saw my own wolf, a small, dying creature with silver fur, whining in the shadows, begging me to give up. "Not yet," I hissed to the ghosts. "Not until he sees what he's done." I was being hunted by my own memories, a pack of ghosts snapping at my heels, their teeth bared in the moonlight. My breath was shallow, my body temp dropping into a dangerous zone where the pain turns into a deceptive, warm sleep. But as the absolute darkness of the grove swallowed me whole, I reached a clearing where the trees were made of white bonewood, and a stream of liquid silver flowed through the center. It glowed with an internal subterranean light, a defiance of the natural world. I collapsed at its edge, my heart slowing to a crawl, my eyes staring at the silver water. I wasn't waiting for a wolf to save me anymore. I was waiting for the monster I was about to become to wake up and tear the world apart. I closed my eyes as the first touch of the silver water reached my fingertips, and for the first time in 18 years, the humming in my blood didn't feel like a prayer. It felt like a war cry. The silver water did not feel like water at all. As my fingertips brushed the glowing surface of the stream in the very heart of the bonewood clearing, the sensation was that of liquid starlight, cold enough to burn, yet hot enough to freeze the blood in my veins. The hum in my marrow, which had been a dull, frustrating vibration for 18 long years, suddenly escalated into a roar that drowned out the howling wind of the Forbidden Grove. I was drifting at the edge of consciousness, my body failing from the trauma of the rejection and the creeping lethality of the cold. But as the silver liquid began to crawl up my skin, defying every law of gravity, the darkness of the grove seemed to retreat in fear. I wasn't just lying by a stream. I was being pulled into an ancient celestial baptism. My mind fractured like glass under a hammer. I was no longer Elara, the discarded servant girl. I was a witness to the dawn of the world. In the shimmering reflections of the silver water, I saw the first ones, The primordial wolves who existed before the first sun was forged from the void. They were beings of pure moonlight, titans of spirit who didn't need packs or alphas, because they were the very essence of the moon goddess herself. And among them stood a creature of blinding brilliance, the Silver Wolf. This was the blood that Marcus and the High Council had called thin and defective. They had spent centuries breeding for brute strength and charcoal fur, becoming dogs of war who had forgotten that the true source of their existence was the silver light they had tried to bury under layers of ego and stone. I felt a surge of divine indignation that wasn't mine, a primal fury that had been dormant for a millennium, and it found its home in the hollowed-out chambers of my shattered heart. The physical transformation began with an agony that made Marcus's rejection feel like a mere pinprick. Every bone in my body didn't just break. It was dismantled, melted down, and reforged in a furnace of lunar energy. I felt my ribcage expanding to house lungs that could breathe the thin air of the heavens. I felt my spine lengthening and hardening into a whip of unbreakable grace. My teeth sharpened into serrated blades of ivory, and my senses exploded. But this wasn't the messy, bloody shift of a standard Blackwood wolf. There was no smell of wet fur or copper blood. Instead, the air around me crystallized into frost. My skin shimmered as my fur erupted. Not black, not gray, but a translucent metallic silver that seemed to trap every stray photon of moonlight and vibrate with its own internal frequency. I let out a cry that started as a human scream of pain and ended as a howl that tore through the fabric of the spirit realm. A sound so ancient and commanding that the bone-white trees around me bowed their heads in recognition. The transfiguration was not merely physical, it was a total rewrite of my soul's blueprint. While my new body adapted to the frozen earth, my consciousness was projected into a vast astral void. There, I encountered the progenitor. She had no name, for names are limitations of the mortal mind. She was simply the Silvered One. Her voice did not pass through my ears but echoed directly within the helix of my DNA. They thought they could discard the moon because she does not bleed like the flesh, she spoke, and the sound was like the majestic grinding of glaciers. They became hounds of the earth, forgetting they are children of the mystery. You are the end of their cycle, Elara. You are the light that reveals the shadows of the king. You are the debt that must be paid. When I finally stood on 4 paws, the world looked like a different reality entirely. My stormy gray eyes had transformed into pools of molten silver, and my vision was no longer limited by the physical darkness. I could see the golden flow of energy in the trees, the rhythmic heartbeat of the earth pulsing beneath the snow, and the fading, jagged thread of the bond that still tried to tether me to Marcus. With a single sharp thought of absolute will, I reached out with my spirit and snapped the remaining fray of that bond. Far away, in the warmth of the palace, I knew he would feel it. A sudden icy void in his chest where his pride used to be. For the first time in my life, I was truly, terrifyingly free. But power without control is just a slower, more spectacular way to die. I spent the next weeks, perhaps months, as time flowed like thick honey in the grove, learning to inhabit this new, lethal form. I wasn't a predator of the woods. I was a predator of the elements. I discovered that when I ran, my paws didn't actually touch the snow. I moved on a cushion of pressurized air, leaving a trail of silver frost and glowing paw prints behind me. I learned to command the shadows of the grove, weaving them into cloaks of invisibility that allowed me to walk past the most dangerous beasts of the forest without a sound. I wasn't just surviving the forbidden grove, I was becoming its undisputed sovereign. The monsters that lived in the deeper darkness, shadow creatures that even alphas feared to mention in whispers, would approach my clearing, only to catch one glimpse of my silver eyes and retreat into the blackness, whimpering like frightened pups. My daily routine became a grueling marriage of physical training and spiritual meditation. Every morning, when the sun tried in vain to penetrate the supernatural mist of the grove, I practiced my human shift. I discovered that my skin now possessed a supernatural resilience. The biting cold no longer bothered me, and my human strength was 10 times that of any warrior I had ever seen in the Blackwood training pits. I could leap between the high branches of the bonewood trees with the agility of a mountain cat, and my senses remained so sharp that I could hear the heartbeat of a rabbit miles away. I began to hunt the corrupted beasts that haunted the borders of the grove, not out of hunger, for the silver water sustained me, but to test my lethality. Every combat was a lesson in cold, calculated precision. I did not fight with the blind rage of a beast. I fought with the terrifying calm of a goddess. One afternoon, while I was practicing a form of lunar manipulation, calling the actual light from the sky to sharpen my claws into blades of pure humming energy, I felt a familiar presence. It was faint, suppressed by fear, but it was unmistakably Silas. He had entered the grove, defying the king's standing orders and his own primal terror of the dark. I watched him from the high branches of an ancient tree, my silver fur blending perfectly with the white bark and the hanging frost. He looked 10 years older than when I had last seen him. His face was gaunt, his eyes haunted by a grief that hadn't found its end. He was carrying a small weathered bundle, my old cloak and a bag of basic rations. He was calling my name into the void, his voice cracking with the strain of his sorrow. "Elara, please, if you're still here, if you can hear me, I'm so sorry. I should have stood up. I should have fought for you." I watched him for a long, agonizing time. The old Elara, the girl who had scrubbed floors and dreamed of kindness, wanted to jump down and comfort him, to tell him that I was alive, but the silver wolf stayed my hand. I needed to know if he was a pawn sent by Marcus, or if he came of his own free will. Silas knelt by the glowing stream where I had first transformed, placing the bundle on the ground as if it were an offering at a tomb. He stayed there until the sun began to set, praying to the moon goddess for the peace of my soul. As he turned to leave, his shoulders slumped in defeat. A pack of rogue wolves, the mangy, twisted scavengers that lived on the outskirts of the grove, emerged from the brush. They were desperate creatures, their minds rotted by the madness of the packless. There were 5 of them, and they saw Silas not as a prince, but as a feast. Silas shifted instantly, his brown wolf sturdy and brave, but he was hopelessly outnumbered and exhausted from the trek. He fought with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to live for, but the rogues were coordinated in their cruelty. They moved in a tightening circle, snapping at his hocks and drawing blood with every pass. I saw the moment his strength began to fail. I saw the lead rogue, a scarred beast with half an ear missing, lunge for Silas's exposed throat. That was when I moved. I didn't shift back into a human. I stayed in my massive silver form, descending from the trees like a falling star of vengeance. I didn't even need to make physical contact. The sheer, crushing pressure of my silver aura sent the rogues flying backward, their bodies hitting the bonewood trees with the force of a hurricane. I stood over Silas, my silver fur bristling with electric energy, my eyes glowing like twin moons. The rogues scrambled to their feet, their instinct for survival finally overriding their hunger. They looked at me, let out a collective whimper of pure, unadulterated terror, and fled into the darkness, leaving a trail of panicked scent behind them. Silas shifted back, his human form covered in deep scratches and drying blood. He stared up at me, his breath coming in shallow gasps of awe. He didn't see a monster. He didn't even see a wolf. He saw a legend made flesh. "Elara," he whispered, his hand reaching out tentatively toward my shimmering fur. Is that truly you?" I leaned down, my cold, wet nose touching his forehead. For a second, I allowed a telepathic spark to pass between us, a vision of the silver stream and the true face of the moon goddess. He gasped, tears streaming down his face as the weight of my power washed over him. "You're not dead. You're the prophecy. You're everything they feared. Go back, Silas." I spoke directly into the center of his mind, my voice sounding like the chime of ancient silver bells. "Tell the king that the ghost he tried to exorcise has found her throne. Tell him that the North Star hasn't gone out. It has become a sun that will burn his kingdom to the ground. And tell him that the debt of the rejection will be paid in silver, in bone, and in blood." I watched him go, making sure he reached the borders of the grove safely, my spirit trailing him like a silent guardian. But as I turned back to my sanctuary, I felt a new sensation, a ripple in the very fabric of the world's energy. The other great alphas of the surrounding territories had sensed the awakening. The balance of power had been tilted, and the world of the Blackwood was no longer just a pack of wolves struggling for territory. It was a kingdom about to be challenged by a goddess in exile. I returned to the clearing, sitting at the edge of the silver stream. I began to practice not just for survival, but for a war of reclamation. I learned how to project my voice across miles of forest, how to chill the blood of my enemies with a single glance, and how to heal the deepest wounds with a touch of my silver light. I was no longer the girl who braided lavender into her hair, hoping for a scrap of affection. I was the Silver Queen, and every day that Marcus sat on his stolen throne was a day closer to his absolute reckoning. I spent the night staring at the palace in the distance, seeing the flickers of their bonfires, and hearing the distant, hollow howls of the pack that had spat on me, they thought they had seen the last of Elara. They had no idea that they had simply provided the darkness required for my light to finally shine. By the end of the 3rd month, my training was complete. I could shift at will with the grace of a shadow, my human form now carrying a permanent, ethereal glow. My hair had turned a shimmering silver white, and my eyes never lost their metallic sheen, even when I tried to hide it. I was a living bridge between the physical and the spiritual, a creature that the ancient scrolls had warned would return when the alphas became too proud and too cruel. I stood at the very edge of the forbidden grove, looking out at the world that had rejected me. It was time to stop hiding. It was time to show the Blackwood pack that the scentless girl was the only one among them who truly carried the scent of the stars. The era of the Silver Empire was about to begin, and it would start with the man who thought he could throw me away like a broken toy. I stepped out of the shadows and into the moonlight, and for the first time in my life, the world trembled at my feet. The gates of the Blackwood kingdom had stood for 5 centuries, towering monoliths of iron and oak that signaled the absolute power of the Alpha King. To the world, they were impenetrable. To me, they were a reminder of the night I was cast out like refuse. But as I stood before them now, bathed in the silver light of a crescent moon, they felt like nothing more than paper. I didn't look like the girl who had left. My skin had a luminous quality. My hair was a cascade of liquid silver, and my eyes, once a stormy gray, were now twin orbs of molten moonlight. I wore a simple dress of woven shadows, a garment I had fashioned from the very essence of the Forbidden Grove. I didn't knock. I didn't howl for entry. I simply walked forward, and the air around me vibrated with such intensity that the iron bolts of the gates groaned and snapped. The heavy oak doors swung open, not by force, but as if the wood itself recognized a superior sovereign. The guards, 2 massive warriors who had once mocked my scentless existence, dropped their spears. They didn't even shift. They fell to their knees, their bodies trembling under the weight of an aura they couldn't comprehend. I didn't spare them a glance. My eyes were fixed on the great hall, where the flickering orange light of common torches felt like an insult to the purity of the night. As I walked through the main thoroughfare of the village, the world seemed to freeze. The Omegas who were hauling water, the warriors sharpening their blades, the mothers tending to their pups, they all stopped. A silence so profound it felt like a physical weight settled over the Blackwood. They saw the ghost return, but I was no longer haunting the shadows. I was the light that burned them. I heard the whispers, no longer sharp and mocking, but breathless and terrified. "Is that Elara? Look at her eyes. She's not a wolf, she's a goddess." Martha, the woman who had once hissed at me to stay away from her children, now stood paralyzed, her hand over her mouth as I passed. I felt no malice toward them. They were simply sheep who had followed a blind shepherd. The ascent to the great hall was slow and deliberate. Every step I took left a faint, glowing frost on the stone, a mark of my new territory. Halfway up, I encountered Sophia. She was surrounded by her elite unit, her black wolf pelt cloak swaying in the wind. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine uncertainty in her amber eyes. She tried to bolster her dominance, her scent of spiced amber flaring in an aggressive wave. "You were told never to return, rogue," Sophia spat, though her voice lacked its usual predatory bite. "The king gave you your life as a mercy. Do not throw it away for a desperate play for attention." I stopped a few paces from her. I didn't need to growl. I simply looked at her, and the silver light in my eyes flared. The air temperature dropped 40 degrees in a heartbeat. "The mercy was mine, Sophia," I said, my voice echoing not from my throat, but from the very air around us. "I allowed you to live so you could witness the end of the era you helped build. Now step aside. I am not here for a warrior's posturing. I am here for the throne that was meant to be mine." Sophia lunged, her wolf spirit manifesting in a shadowy roar, but before she could even close the distance, a wave of silver energy erupted from my skin. It didn't harm her. It simply pinned her and her warriors against the stone walls, their muscles locked in a stasis they couldn't break. I walked past them, the sound of my bare feet on the stone sounding like the ticking of a doomsday clock. When I reached the heavy iron doors of the great hall, I felt the shift in the atmosphere. Inside, a banquet was in progress, but it wasn't the joyous celebration I had heard months ago. The scent in the room was sour, the smell of decay and sickness. I pushed the doors open. The scene was a stark contrast to the night of my rejection. Marcus sat on the Obsidian throne, but he was a shadow of the man I had once loved. His skin was sallow, his golden eyes dimmed and bloodshot. The rite of severance had backfired. Because I was a fated mate of the Silver lineage, the highest bloodline, the act of rejecting me had begun to eat away at his own life force. He was suffering from the mate wither, a curse that only strikes alphas who throw away a gift from the goddess herself. Beside him, High Elder Valerius looked frantic, pouring tonics into a chalice that Marcus barely had the strength to hold. The room went silent as I entered. The Council of 12 stood, their hands going to their ceremonial daggers. But Marcus just stared. He looked at me as if I were a hallucination born of his fever. "Elara," he whispered, his voice a raspy ghost of the boom it once held. "I am the answer to your prayers, Marcus," I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "And the fulfillment of your fears." Valerius stepped forward, his staff trembling. "This is an abomination! You are a rogue! Guards, seize this intruder! She has used dark magic to disguise her weakness." "Magic?" I laughed, and the sound was like the chiming of stars. I raised my hand, and the torches in the hall suddenly turned from orange to a brilliant, blinding silver. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to come alive, bowing toward me. "I am the magic this pack forgot. I am the blood you called thin. I am the Silver Queen, and I have come to reclaim what you tried to bury in the dirt." I walked toward the throne, the warriors in the hall stepping back as if I were a tidal wave. One young warrior, perhaps hoping for a promotion, tried to block my path. With a flick of my wrist, a spear of solid moonlight formed in the air and pinned his cloak to the floor, leaving him unharmed, but utterly immobilized. I didn't want a bloodbath. I wanted a surrender. I stopped at the foot of the dais. Marcus was shaking now, his wolf clawing at the inside of his mind, recognizing the mate it had been denied. The bond wasn't there anymore. I had snapped it, but the soul void I had left was screaming for me. "You look unwell, Alpha," I said, my voice dripping with a cold, elegant pity. "It seems the crown you chose over me is becoming quite heavy. Tell me, was it worth it? To sit on a throne of obsidian while your soul rots away in the dark?" I did what was necessary for the pack," Marcus gasped, clutching the arms of his chair. "I needed a queen of power. I didn't know." "You didn't look," I corrected. "You looked with your eyes, not your heart. You saw a servant because you wanted a servant. You wanted someone you could rule, not someone who would rule beside you." I turned my gaze to the council. "And you elders of wisdom. You spent centuries breeding for muscle and violence, discarding the spiritual essence of our people. You created a kingdom of glass, and today, it shatters." Valerius raised his staff to strike me, but I was faster. I shifted mid-stride, not into a standard wolf, but into the massive shimmering silver loba. The transformation was instantaneous and silent. I stood nearly 7 feet tall at the shoulder, my silver fur radiating a light so intense that the elders had to shield their eyes. I let out a howl, not a cry of pain, but a command. It was the song of the first ones. Across the kingdom, every wolf felt it. The Omegas, the warriors, even the pups. It was a call to their true nature. Outside, I could hear the sounds of hundreds of wolves howling in response, a chorus of awakening that drowned out the petty politics of the Great Hall. I shifted back to my human form, standing on the dais, inches from Marcus. I reached out and touched his cheek. The contact sent a jolt of silver energy through him. For a moment, his eyes cleared, and the sallow color of his skin vanished. He saw me, really saw me, for the first time. The regret in his eyes was a tectonic shift. "Elara," he choked out, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on his face. "I'm so sorry. I see you now." "It's too late for sorry, Marcus," I whispered, and for a second, the old Elara's voice was there, soft and mournful. "The bond is gone. You killed the girl who loved you, but the queen who stands here, she has work to do." I turned to the council. By the laws of the lunar blood, a king who cannot sustain his own life force is unfit to lead. A king who rejects a fated mate of the Silver lineage forfeits his claim to the throne. Do any of you dispute the ancient law? The elders looked at each other, their faces pale. They knew the law. They had used it for centuries to keep themselves in power, never imagining it would be turned against them by a scentless girl. One by one, they bowed their heads. Silas stepped forward from the crowd, his eyes shining with pride and relief. He knelt first. "The Silver Queen has returned," Silas shouted, his voice echoing through the hall. Long live the lunar sovereign! The cry was taken up by the warriors in the hall, then by the people outside. It was a roar of change that shook the foundations of the castle. I turned back to Marcus. He was slumped in the throne, the temporary energy I had given him fading. He looked at me with a mixture of love and terror. "What will you do with me?" he asked. "I will give you the mercy you denied me," I said. "You will not be hunted. You will not be cast out to the humans. You will stay here, in the shadows of the palace you loved so much. You will be a reminder to all who follow that the moon does not reward the arrogant, and that the greatest power often hides in the places you refuse to look." I stepped up to the throne. Marcus stood, his legs trembling, and vacated the seat. He walked down the steps, a broken man, and found a place among the common warriors. I sat on the obsidian throne, but as my skin touched the stone, it began to change. The black obsidian turned to white marble, and the harsh, jagged edges smoothed into the shape of a blooming lotus. The hall itself seemed to breathe, the dust of centuries blown away by a fresh silver wind. "Today," I declared, my voice resonating with the power of the Forbidden Grove and the ancestors, "the Blackwood pack ends. Today the Silver Empire begins. We will no longer hunt for sport. We will no longer breed for cruelty. We will return to the ways of the first ones. We will be the guardians of the night, not its monsters." The first act of my reign was to abolish the caste system. I called for Thorn, the healer, and tasked him with creating a new school of medicine, based on the silver water of the grove. I called for the Omegas and promoted them to the keepers of the hearth, giving them equal status to the warriors. I saw the faces of the people change, from fear to hope, from resentment to purpose. But the night was not over. As I sat on my new throne, I felt a presence at the edge of my consciousness. The other alphas of the north, the Red Fang, the Iron Claw, the Shadow Walkers, they were all converging on our borders. They had sensed the shift. They thought the Blackwood was weak because its king had fallen. They thought they could swoop in and claim the Silver Queen as a prize. I stood up, my eyes flashing with a predatory silver light. I looked out the great hall's open doors, toward the dark horizon where the armies of the north were gathering. "Let them come," I whispered to the moon. "They think they are coming for a girl. They have no idea they are walking into a storm." I walked to the balcony of the palace, looking down at the thousands of wolves now gathered in the plaza. I didn't need a crown. The moonlight itself formed a halo around my head. I raised my arms, and a shield of silver energy expanded from the palace, covering the entire village in a shimmering dome of protection. "Citizens of the Silver Empire," I cried out. "The world thinks we are broken. They think because our old ways have died, we are defenseless. But we are not the wolves of the earth anymore. We are the wolves of the stars. Arm yourselves not with hate, but with the light I have given you. Tonight we don't just defend our home. Tonight, we show the world that the Silver Queen has returned, and the moon is on our side." The roar that answered me was unlike anything heard in 1,000 years. It was the sound of a people reborn. As I watched the first line of the Red Fang warriors appear on the distant ridge, I didn't feel fear. I felt a cold, sharp hunger. This was the final step of my journey, from servant to ghost to exile to goddess. I shifted one last time, my massive silver form standing on the edge of the balcony, a beacon of hope for my people, and a symbol of doom for my enemies. Marcus watched from the crowd, his heart breaking as he realized the magnitude of what he had lost. He saw not just a queen, but the future of the world, a future he could have shared if he had only been brave enough to love a scentless girl. But as I lunged from the balcony, a silver streak of lightning heading for the front lines of the enemy, he knew that the era of Marcus was over. The era of Elara had begun, and the world would never be dark again. The horizon was no longer a line of darkness. It was a jagged teeth of fire and steel. The surrounding alphas, those who had built their empires on the bones of the weak, had arrived. Led by Alpha Malfus of the Red Fang, a man whose reputation for cruelty was whispered in every corner of the northern realms, they didn't come to negotiate. They came to extinguish the silver spark before it could ignite a revolution. As I stood on the highest rampart of my newly christened Silver Palace, the scent of 10,000 hostile wolves drifted on the wind, a suffocating musk of aggression and old-world dominance. They believed that because I had abolished the caste system, because I led with mercy, that I had made the Silver Empire soft. They were about to learn that mercy is the privilege of the truly powerful. Marcus stood several paces behind me. He was no longer the king, but he had found a new quiet strength as a strategist. His physical decay had stabilized since I took the throne, but he remained a shadow of his former self, a living reminder of the cost of pride. "Malfus won't stop at the borders, Elara," Marcus said, his voice now a steady rasp. "He sees your existence as a personal insult to every alpha who ever drew breath. He will burn every home in this valley to see you in chains." I didn't turn to look at him. My eyes were fixed on the Red Fang vanguard, their torches moving like a slow-moving lava flow toward our gates. "Then let him come," I replied, my voice resonating with the subterranean hum of the silver stream. "He thinks he is fighting a pack. He doesn't realize he is fighting the moon herself." I descended the stairs of the rampart, my bare feet clicking against the marble that had once been obsidian. My people were ready. Silas led the front lines, his eyes reflecting the silver glow of the dome I had cast over the city. There was no fear in their faces, only a resolute, quiet fury. These were the Omegas who had been spat upon, the warriors who had been told they weren't pure enough, and the mothers who had feared for their pups' futures. Now, they were the Silver Legion. "Do not break the line," I commanded, my voice projecting into the minds of every soul under my protection. "You are not fighting for territory. You are fighting for the right to exist. Let the silver in your blood guide your claws." The first wave hit the silver dome like a battering ram. The Red Fang warriors, massive beasts of soot-colored fur and blood-red eyes, threw themselves against the energy shield, their roars shaking the very foundations of the mountain. I waited. I let them exhaust their initial rage. When the dome finally began to flicker under the combined magical assault of the Red Fang shamans, I gave the signal. I didn't shift immediately. I stepped through the gates as a woman, my silver hair whipping around me like a halo of blades. Malfus himself stepped forward from the darkness, a titan of a man with scars across his throat that suggested he had survived 1,000 executions. "So, this is the little ghost Marcus couldn't handle," Malfus sneered, his voice a guttural growl that made the gravel beneath his feet vibrate. "You've done well to build a cage for your pets, little girl. But now, the real wolves have arrived. Step down, surrender the silver power to those who know how to use it, and I might let you live as my concubine." The laughter of his commanders rose like a discordant choir. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I simply raised my hand, and the crescent moon above us seemed to double in size, its light focusing into a single, blinding pillar that struck the center of the battlefield. "You speak of power, Malfus," I said, and the ground began to ripple like water. "But you are nothing more than a parasite feeding on the fear of your own kind. You think the silver is a weapon to be wielded? It is a judgment to be endured." I shifted then, not with the agonizing crack of bones, but with a transition of pure light. The silver wolf emerged, larger and more radiant than she had been in the Forbidden Grove. I was no longer a creature of flesh. I was a celestial event. I lunged, a streak of moonlight that tore through the Red Fang lines. The battle was a symphony of silver and red. My legion moved with a coordination that defied the standard pack tactics. They didn't need a loud alpha's bark. They moved according to the rhythmic hum of the silver light I shared with them. Silas was a whirlwind of brown fur and silver-tipped claws, protecting the flanks with a ferocity that would have made his ancestors weep with pride. Marcus, from the battlements, directed the archers and the mages, his deep knowledge of the terrain turning every narrow pass into a death trap for the invaders. But the true conflict was between Malfus and me. He shifted into a monstrous, corrupted wolf, his fur matted with dark magic, and his eyes glowing with an unholy, abyssal fire. He was the embodiment of the old world's rot. We met in the center of the valley, our collision creating a shockwave that flattened the surrounding trees. He fought with a desperate, heavy violence, trying to crush me under his sheer mass. But I was the wind. I was the light. Every time his claws tried to find my throat, I was elsewhere, leaving only a stinging frost behind. "Why won't you die?" Malfus roared, his voice cracking as the silver light began to sear his lungs. "Because I have already died once," I replied, my spirit voice echoing through the valley. "Marcus killed the girl who could have been defeated. You are fighting the ghost that was born in her place." I gathered the collective hope and pain of my people, funneling it into a single devastating roar. It wasn't a sound of anger. It was the song of the progenitors. It was a frequency that the corrupted blood of the Red Fang couldn't withstand. Malfus let out a final, agonizing howl as his dark magic was purged by the silver light, his body collapsing into the snow, no longer a titan, but a broken, shivering dog. The silence that followed was absolute. The remaining Red Fang warriors dropped their weapons, their eyes clearing of the dark influence Malfus had held over them. They looked at me, then at their fallen leader, and then at the Silver Legion. They didn't see enemies. They saw a future they had been denied. One by one, they shifted back to their human forms and knelt in the blood-stained snow. The war was over, not because I had killed them all, but because I had shown them that there was another way to be a wolf. I shifted back to my human form, my breath even, my silver dress untouched by the filth of the battle. I walked to the center of the valley and looked up at the moon. The violet rift I had feared was gone. The ancestors were at peace. I turned back to my palace, seeing my people emerging from the gates, cheering and weeping with a joy that had been absent from these mountains for 1,000 years. Marcus was there, waiting at the base of the stairs. He looked at me, and for the first time, there was no shame in his eyes, only a profound, humble gratitude. "You did it, Elara," he whispered as I approached. "You saved us from ourselves." "We saved each other, Marcus," I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. I felt the last of the Rejection's curse dissolve. He wouldn't be king, and he wouldn't be my mate, but he would be a man of honor again. That was the final mercy I owed to the boy from the haylofts. I walked up to the balcony of the Silver Palace and looked out over the northern realms. The other alphas, the Ironclaw, the Shadow Walkers, they were still out there, watching from a distance. They had seen the fall of Malfus. They knew that the era of the tyrant was ending. I raised my arms, and the silver light from my palms spread out across the horizon, not as a wall, but as a bridge. "Tonight," I declared, my voice carrying to the very ends of the earth, "we do not celebrate a victory of blood. We celebrate the birth of a new dawn. The Silver Empire is not a kingdom of borders, but a sanctuary for the soul. To every rejected mate, to every scentless wolf, to every soul who has been told they are nothing, the gates are open. The moon goddess no longer demands our blood. She demands our light, and we shall give it to her." The roar of the people was a sound that would echo through the centuries. I sat on the lotus throne, Kalen sitting at my feet, his silver eyes fixed on the stars. The servant girl was gone. The ghost was gone. The exile was gone. I was Elara, the Silver Empress, the moon's chosen, and as long as the stars burned in the sky, my people would never walk in the dark again. The story of the rejected mate had become the gospel of a goddess, and the world was finally, beautifully, at peace. And so the story of Elara, the Silver Queen, comes to its triumphant end. From the cold stones of the Alpha's ledge to the radiant glory of the Lotus throne, she proved that our greatest strength often lies in the very things the world rejects. But her journey is just one of many in the chronicles of the Silver Empire. If you felt the power of the Silver Wolf tonight, don't let the flame go out. Subscribe to Alpha Destiny Tales and join our pack. We bring you the most epic tales of fated mates, forbidden power, and the ultimate revenge every week. Did Marcus deserve Elara's mercy? Or should she have let the cold take him? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'll be hearting the most passionate answers. And if you're hungry for more, click the video on your screen right now to discover the story of the Shadow King's runaway bride. Another journey of power you won't want to miss. Until the next full moon, keep your spirit bright and your howl loud. This is Alpha Destiny Tales. Sleep well, and may the goddess watch over your path.